Welcome to councillors, staff, members of the public. Good morning, and declare the meeting open. Can I remind councillors that the public section of this meeting is being recorded and will be made available on the Bay of Plenty Regional Council YouTube channel following the meeting and archived for a period of 3 years. To those members of the public here today, all care will be taken to maintain your privacy. However, as a visitor in the public gallery, your presence may be recorded. By remaining in the public gallery, it is understood your consent is given if your image is inadvertently broadcast. The camera for members of the public is up there to my right. It's seeing your backs, our faces, but these cameras behind me will not be used today. I also remind all present that local government decision-making affords no protection to councillors, council officers and the public for comments made during the meetings and are subsequently challenged in a court of law determined to be slanderous. Okay, things aside, could I call for apologies? I have apologies from Councillor Thurston. Any other apologies? No. Would somebody like to move? Councillor Von Daddelson, seconded Councillor Rose. All those in favour, please say aye. Items 3, items not on the agenda if there are none. Order of business as per in the agenda. Public excluded to be transferred into the open as none. Declarations of conflict of interest, are there any? No. Right, moving on to the minutes of the previous meeting from 12th of September. This is on page 9 of the agenda. I do apologise because on the front page in attendance and in apologies, we have got a whole list of other people who should have been there, but somehow they dropped off and it's being amended. Would somebody like to move the minutes of the 15th September meeting be approved? Councillor Eaty, seconded by Councillor Clark. Are there any, move and second? Move that be a true and correct record. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, carried. Any matters arising? Oh, just on page 15, the in terms of the follow-up from the spray irrigation for Rotorua District Council into Waka Forest, apparently the Kawanata has been signed, and so the application to direct discharge into Lake Rotorua has been withdrawn. So that's a plus. Councillor Nees?
Just one. At the last meeting, I requested a report on performance, our performance as a regulator in terms of municipal wastewater and stormwater.
Yeah. And
I note in today's agenda, we've got a report on compliances, and I noted that over 20% are either a moderate or serious non-compliance of wastewater, and I think that's pretty damning, and I'd like to know what we're doing about it. So I'd like to understand when we're going to get this report, please.
We bring that up when we talk about the waste. There's a diagram there, I can't remember which page on the wastewater. We'll talk about it then. Bring it up then. Thank you. Presentations. Right. I've got Port of Tauranga dust management underway. Joey McKenzie, who's the Environmental Manager for Port of Tauranga. Welcome along, Joey. You have a colleague there with you as well?
Yes, Stan Devo from the Port of Tauranga.
Oh, Stan, of course. Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Dan.
Welcome, gentlemen. You've got a presentation, Joey, and it's up behind me, should be. Joey presented to the Mount Industrial Network last week, and it was very good. So we just wanted to hear what the port is doing in terms of its dust mitigation exercises. So welcome along, Joey. Turn your microphone on, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I have no one in mind if I sit.
Yeah, go for it.
So in a nutshell, this presentation is just to discuss what the port's been doing in the last 12 months, I suppose, in terms of dust mitigation. The port has been working towards improving air quality, in particular, amongst other things, dust, for some time. However, we will just be covering the last 12 or so months. That's going to be a bit of a pain. Just to start with, we'll go over a little bit of background around the port. This presentation is going to be focusing on the Mount Wolves side of Port of Tauranga, not so much Cycle Point, as air quality issues with dust generally are centred around the Mount side. So we've got a range of activities that operate on the Mount Wolves. Some of them, such as containers, are handled here. Not as many as at Cycle Point, however, there is some activities like this. This is generally a clean activity. However, we have other activities, which I'm sure many in the room would be aware do have associated risk of impacts to air quality. This is one here. This is bulk handling. Not all cargoes do have dust risk associated to it. However, there are dusty cargoes which do. And then also we have a range of activities that operate in the port's log yard areas, and there are definitely some dirty areas and some dirty cargoes in those spaces, so there is dust risk and air quality risk associated to those activities. At this point, it's probably just worth mentioning that the Port of Tauranga itself actually doesn't undertake the majority of these activities on the port grounds. These activities are undertaken by marshals and stevedores and other independent companies that operate on the port. Though the port does have a responsibility to make sure standards are set, monitored, and ensure compliance with those standards. And a lot of these businesses have their own standards and procedures as well. So this is a map of Port area. We're going to be focusing on the eastern area there at the bottom of the screen. This slide here shows several of the monitoring stations installed by Awanui Regional Council to investigate air quality in late 2018. Unfortunately, some of them are blocked by the pahara at the bottom. We start to the right-hand side of the screen, which is the northern area there. That's Rata Street, the old fire station. And so there's an air quality monitor installed there. Thank you. Moving south, the next one down, that is Rail Yard South. That's in the Key Rail Yard area just north of Hull Road, the Hull Road entrance into the port. And then if we head further south again, that dot's actually in the wrong place. It's a little bit too south, but on the corner of Waimari Street and Tortola Street, there is another air quality monitor there. There's also one opposite Cycle Point. We're not going to touch on that today. That hasn't had any huge issues. There's also others at Bridge Marina, Whareroa Marae, Te Haviland Way. The ones I've just listed here, they measure dust, TSP is another name for it, and they also measure the inhalable dust, which is PM10. There are other monitors installed that are there to measure VOCs. Again, we're not going to be looking at that. We're looking at the dust component today. We might be losing some battery power on this. So these monitors were installed in late 2018. With these monitors, as mentioned, PM10 was one of the air quality parameters installed. This is also referred to as inhalable dust. This is the fine portion of the dust that can be inhaled. And as the ability to monitor PM10 was installed, the measurements from these monitors were also used to assess compliance with the National Environmental Standard for Air Quality, this one here. So the standard or the limit for PM10 is an average or a mean of 50 micrograms per cubic metre concentration in a 24-hour period, and that's midnight to midnight. We're allowed one exceedance, or an airshed is allowed one exceedance in a 12-month period. Any more than that is non-compliant with the standard. So early on, some exceedances started to occur. In the time that the monitoring is undertaken, that one furthest to the right there, that's Rata Street, that's had, I think, 2 or 3 exceedances. The next one down, Rail Yard South, it's had something like 20. That's the real problem one there. And then Tortola Street, that's had 2. One of them was ruled out from Australian bushfires. However, it has had 1 When these exceedances started to occur, the port started to look at some of the data collected at these monitors and started to assess what are the sources of the dust. We looked at wind conditions, we looked at wind speeds, and what we did is we identified potential sources within the port. It became apparent there were port sources in there, and we tried to identify as best as we could what they would be from the data that we had. So the first major area that we identified this here is the log yard area on the port. It covers about 2/3 of the Mount Wolves footprint. We identified that as being a high risk dust source. Within that area, we identified high risk areas. So, sorry, can we go back? So within that area, we identified high-risk areas. The large area there in yellow, that is a log preload area. So that's an area that logs are stored between being moved from the larger storage area and prior to being loaded onto ships on the wharf. That area is high intensity. It gets a lot of machine movement. It gets a lot of particulate on the ground when certain loading methods are used. And it can often be an open space, which allows wind to pick up speed. When wind speed generally gets over 10 knots, that's when you can start to have dust lift into the air and become entrained in the air. Also, vehicle movements through those areas, which is a high frequency activity, has the ability to lift that dust into the air and suspend it in the air. From there, it can travel off-site. Also, the two smaller squares in there in this aerial image, those are empty log storage areas. Same rules apply there. They're generally not as open, but they do have machine movement. And even after cleaning, there is a portion of dust that remains on the ground that is at risk of being lifted into air. That one's a bit hard to see. There was an area just through here. These are our predominant bulk berths. So some dusty cargoes are unloaded here, and that process can be dusty. We identified that there wasn't as much evidence to suggest that was causing the issues off-site on the exceedance days. We know that they do discharge dust, and if we're going to look at the port as a whole, we need to be looking at that activity as well. This next area here in green, there's a couple of little rats and mice areas. The first one to the right, it's just next to Rail Yard South monitor there. That's a tip pile area, which has been there for a long time. Obviously, some of the material in that area is fine and can become dust or airborne dust. So further to the south there is a bark storage shed. Within that material, there's also potential for dust. So once we'd identified our high-risk areas, we had a look at what mitigation options we had available. So the first one here is structural controls. So this, back one. To the left is the bark storage shed that I just discussed. It looks like there's a lot of dust coming out of there. That's actually fine water mist. So there is a water mist curtain installed on the shed. It's activated whenever there's activity occurring within the shed. The idea of this is to act as a barrier to any dust that's trying to escape. Any dust that does manage to get through that barrier is wetted. It's heavier and it's more likely to settle out in close proximity to that shed where it can be collected by a vacuum sweeper truck. That's one of them coming out through the doorway there. We've used this kind of technology in several instalments across the port. We've done some monitoring on it, and it is a very successful way to mitigate dust. Next photo there to the right in the centre. This is a realignment of a roadway. So up towards the top left-hand corner there's a section in red. That's one of those high-risk log storage or preload areas I discussed earlier. The prevailing wind travels through that area, especially when it's an open space, and then it travels down through where the old roadway was, which you can see here. That then delivers dust towards the boundary. So what the port's done in this instance is they've actually realigned the roadway now in line with this drawing. We've now filled that old roadway with logs, and instead of acting as a wind tunnel, it now acts as a wind barrier. Next slide, please. Sorry. There might just be a lag, sorry.
It's just really slow.
Okay. And then we've got the third photo there on the right, which is wind fences. The port's been installing these for some time. However, we've installed more work, undertaken some work to actually measure the effectiveness of these fences. The idea is they slow the wind velocity and allows particulate to settle out quicker. With successful monitoring results, we'll be looking at installing more. So those are some examples of the structural controls we've installed. It would be nice if we could fix everything with an engineered solution, but unfortunately it doesn't work that way. The next thing we had to look at was actually what kind of behavioural controls could be installed to try and improve air quality. So this is an example of a textbook approach. What we did was one better. We went out and actually put it into practice and we measured it in the log yards. This graph's showing two things. So the darker dots there on the left-hand side, that is a loader travelling in a swept log storage area, so an area that is used to store logs. The logs have been removed, it has been swept, but as you can see along the bottom, as the speed increases, the amount of inhalable dust also increases as well. The smaller section just below that, that's a Maffey truck, and that's travelling on a designated roadway. These are higher swept areas because they are traffic areas. The same thing happens here. As the speed increases, the amount of inhalable dust also increases. But this is also telling us that if you travel on those cleaner swept areas, no surprise, you actually reduce the amount of dust lifted into the air. So we took this information to our marshallers and some other key parties and exporters of the port. We presented it to them, we presented the issue, and we said this is some of the things we can do to address it. So what we've tried to do is deter these operators from travelling through these swept log storage areas and keeping to the roadways. To help them out, we installed cones to start with. And then once people stopped colliding with cones, we replaced them with concrete barriers. We didn't have too many fatality of cones either, which was nice to see. The idea with this is that in the past, operators would have cut through these corners when they were empty. They would have found empty log areas where they could take a shortcut for efficiency gains and also for safety gains. We identified that this is not something that we can continue. There are productivity losses, but it's something that we need to do. And this has worked quite exceptionally. There's been a huge push from these marshalling companies and from their principals as well to tackle these behaviours in the log yard areas, really getting the operators, the guy driving the machine, to understand what his actions are doing in terms of generating dust. So not only have we seen a reduction in people cutting corners, we've seen a reduction of people taking those shortcuts through empty areas and a decrease in the dust generated. We also looked at speed in these areas. So there is a 20 km/h speed limit in the roadways in these areas. We undertook some monitoring to identify the compliance with that limit. You'll see there on the left that is the amount of non-compliance with that speed limit in these areas on a roadway last year. And then on the right is following reinforcement with those operators. We've managed to reduce it down. The non-compliance is significantly down. There's still a bit of work to do there to bring it down further, but it's a good news story nonetheless. We also looked at these high-risk areas. We identified what can we do to better mitigate the risk in here. Increased vacuum sweeping was something that was easy. We have 3 of these sweepers operating during peak times on the port, just continuously sweeping the log yards. During off-peak times, we've got 2 operating. So they've had quite a bit of, we've done a lot of work with the sweeper drivers. We've identified to them the areas they want to be looking out for, those large open spaces, making sure that they're not just swept once, that they're continuously swept as they don't stay clean after they've been swept the first time. We've worked with the people operating in these areas to make sure they improve their housekeeping, make their operators aware of what their activities are doing to generate dust. In addition to that, those areas that are log berths, when a ship is being loaded, that is an area that is taken responsibility by the operators in those areas. And they've also increased their own sweeping within those areas, and that's routine sweeping to keep the amount of particulate down whilst they're operating. The irony is that also the cleaning up of this material can generate dust. This is a plough, a bark plough. It is used to travel over empty log storage areas prior to the vacuum sweeper truck. In certain conditions, it can cause quite a bit of dust generation in itself. Initially, our housekeeping providers, Dalton's, looked and purchased a snow plough from the States. It was delayed due to COVID. And we knew that this summer and spring we needed it sooner. So they went into the shed and they built this. This is a prototype. There is some refining to do from here, but basically it's water suppression, a bit of number 8 wire approach, and basically dampens down that material as it's handled, prevents or reduces the amount that can escape to air. Same concept again, if anything does escape to air, it's wetted down, it's heavier, less likely to travel large distances and ideally stay within the site. We've also seen a change in how the log businesses and those port users handle their materials. So this here is a loading style called bunks. Involves a lot more picking up and putting down of logs. Every time you pick up and put down a bundle of logs, they rub together more. You lose more material to the ground, including fine material that can be lifted into here. And instead of this option, we've seen an increase in the use of trailers. So a trailer operation is different. The logs are picked up in the storage area, placed on a trailer, brought all the way to the ship's side without being put down or rehandled, and then they're lifted. So the reduction in the amount of times handled reduces the amount of product lost to the ground. There is still bunks being undertaken, and they are reducing in frequency. To counter that, there is generally much better management of a work site when a bunk operation is underway, which is another good positive that we've seen. And this is the port users taking it upon themselves to change their behaviours and step up. We've also seen the installation of debarker offsite. So this is murupara, and this currently removes the bark from about 15% of the logs that come through the port prior to them even arriving. And as they take that bark material off, they take a lot of that fine material off as well. We've done some monitoring, and there's significantly less dust associated to handling of these logs as anyone would imagine. We've also addressed bulk cargo handling. The port has best practice procedures in place. We have been enforcing these for some time. However, in recent times, we've stepped up that enforcement, and we've also engaged the importers, and we've engaged the management of the stevedoring companies handling these cargoes, and we've seen a multi-agency push for compliance. In this photo here, that's a peaked hopper. That is a no-no. That is something that happens less frequently these days. It does still happen. However, when it is, it's identified quicker and actions are taken quicker to prevent it occurring. Not only this, we've also seen improvement in the guys operating the cranes. They're more aware of their activities. They're more aware of the dust that they generate, and they're more aware that they need to shut down when excessive dust is being generated. We've also, again, looked at this fine water misting technology. This is a misting hopper. We have been working on these for some time. Same concept, anything that does escape the hopper is wetted down. It's more likely to settle. The stevedores operating on this berth, or any berth with dusty cargoes, are also required to vacuum sweep. So as it falls out of suspension, it can be recovered. This is some monitoring we've done. So this is 25 metres away from a hopper, and this is inhalable dust. You can see all these spikes here. So each one of those spikes is when a grab is opened and dust leaves the site. That section of green there is when the misters are turned on. So you can see those spikes, they're muted, and general average comes down as well. So the port has had 2 misting hoppers for some time. We're now working on another 4. We've had a bit of trouble with this in terms of trying to get it across the board with our importers. You can imagine the idea of adding water to some cargoes is not favourable to some people. So it took us quite a while. It took us a bit of work to actually identify to them that the amount of water is actually being used is minuscule. When you look at the throughput of the cargo through these hoppers and you look at the potential increase in moisture of these products, it's next to nothing. It's less than the natural variation of the products. It's been a hard thing to get across the line, but we've done quite a bit of work and we've bridged that gap now. So this is some of the things that we've done. What we now are doing is looking to see, obviously, if it's worked. So we've looked at Ralliart South Monitor. And the reason we've chosen this monitor is it's had the most exceedances. This year it's had 1, possibly 2. The second that hasn't been confirmed yet. This time last year it had 15. The high risk period for this monitor is during spring and summer. Last year we saw the first exceedances start at the end of August. I think it was the 28th of August and 29th of August, and they ran through into autumn. So I apologise, this looks like a bunch of squiggly lines, and it is that. What we're trying to show in this image here is in orange is the 10-minute concentrations of inhalable dust from the 1st of September to the 11th of December in 2019. And then in blue is the same, but for this year. The 50 is the limit. Now, every time it goes over this, it's not an exceedance because we're talking about a 24-hour mean for an exceedance. This is just individual readings through the day. So every time that it goes above that red line, it's potentially contributing to an exceedance of the 24-hour mean. And what we see here is that though blue line does still go over the 50, it is far less frequent. And that's another way to look at it there. So that's the number of times those 10-minute averages have gone over 50 from the 1st of September to the 11th of December for 2019. And in 2020, I forget off the top of my head, it might be a 78% reduction, I think it is. And this is the average for all of those readings during those times. Again, I recall it's about 24% reduction in the mean PM10 concentration through those periods this year compared to the previous. So that's it. We're not done yet. There's still more measures to deploy. We're looking at the tip pile in the new year, making some changes there in terms of structural controls to minimise risk. We're obviously still getting exceedances. We just spoke of a couple at Ralliart South, so we know that we need more work in these areas. The positive thing is that we've identified what can be done. We are aware of what we can do moving forward. Unfortunately, there is an element of adaptive management with this approach. And to be fair, we've had close calls. There's been times we haven't exceeded and we've been close. But it's about looking into those issues, identifying them, and figuring out what we can do to move forward. And that's the process that we're travelling down now.
Thank you, Joey. Thank you for that presentation. Before I open it up for questions, Dan, did you want to say anything in terms of from your point of view?
Not really, other than I've spoken to a number of the councillors and presented some different forums on it, and it's just really to reinforce the port's commitment at a management level and also at a board level to, I guess, introduce some step changes and make sure we're doing everything we can to maintain a healthy environment around the port.
Thank you. You're aware, last week before, we've set up a Wanganui Air Quality Working Party. Joey, were you aware of that?
Well, we are, and the port wasn't initially involved in it, but we understand moving forward we will be. So.
Good to hear. Good to hear. Because I think from the first meeting, the emphasis was they wanted more industry involved in that working party, just so that we could get a handle on everybody could share the information. But pleasing to see what you do, and I like your comment, Joey, you haven't finished yet. So, yeah, open it up for questions. Councillor Love, and then Councillor Crosby.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As the chairman of the Risk and Assurance Committee, I'm delighted to see the progress, should I say, pleased to see the progress we are now making. And what we have to remember is the importance of the port to the national economy and also to local employment in the area. Bearing that in mind, we also have to look at it's becoming increasingly important the social licence to operate. And from the various conversations we've had through the year, it's pleasing to see that the port is taking this really seriously. So all I can say is commend you for your action so far, but keep on a good track.
Thank you. Councillor Crosby.
Yeah, thanks, Joey. When you use the trailer approach for logs versus bunking, are they not treated with methyl bromide? Just are they going somewhere else? That's one question. And the other one is, what's the ratio now going on to trailers versus bunking?
Well, yeah, in terms of methyl bromide treatment, there's no split between loading methods per methyl bromide. Some forms of methyl bromide treatment does lend itself to using a bunk operation over a trailer operation, but there's no hard and fast rules around what kind of treatment or lack of treatment gets what kind of loading. In terms of what's the current split of bunks versus trailer currently is, we have one operator that operates at about, last I heard, about 80% trailers. We have another major operator that is 100% bunks. However, within the next coming months, they are moving to embrace trailers more. The port's also looking at how else we can help facilitate a move towards a greater use of trailers.
Thank you. Councillor White, and then Councillor Rose.
Thank you for your presentation. It's obviously a complex situation, and you're working pretty hard with mitigations to reduce down the dust levels. So that's great. One of the most complex issues in this is how do you get that discipline around your workers. You mentioned the crane driver sees the dust, and shut the crane down. There's lost production, that impacts on the economics of things. And so I guess my question is around what level. I think that's a critical issue, that level of sustainability of your mitigation approaches is that human factor. What are you doing or proposing to do to create resilience in that area? Do you incentivize in any way? Because there is that issue of the contest and the tensions between economics as well.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that, and probably the easiest way to answer it is a little bit like our commitment to health and safety. And I'd say we're in a situation with environmental compliance that we were in with health and safety 10 years ago. And I think now there is a general acceptance that you can't undertake activities that compromise on health and safety. And we've just had to go through quite a significant, behavioural change within the port to let people know that, look, it's not all about productivity. For us to survive here, we've got to maintain our social licence to operate, and if we don't get these environmental behaviours right, we will get shut down. So I think there's a genuine commitment, not just on the part of the port, but the log exporters and the operators. They realise that if they don't get it right, their businesses won't be sustainable. So it's initially been a bit of hard work trying to change some entrenched behaviours, but we're getting there. But as we mentioned earlier, there's still a bit of work in front of us. So we've just got to keep at it. But I think also too, when you explain to the log exporters, the forest owners, and the operators the reasons why we're doing this and the significance of not getting it right, they get it.
Councillor Rose.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to ask in regards to, you were talking about the sweeper trucks. And also, I just wanted to ask, how many have you actually got in operation and how often do they actually go around the port itself? I know you said multiple times a day, but how often is that multiple times a day?
So our contractors have 3 sweeper trucks. They work continuously. Those 3 will cover peak times, so Monday to Friday, about 4 in the morning till 3 o'clock. And then 3 o'clock through to 11, there's 2 operating. And then with a stand down period from that period through to 4 o'clock the following morning. There's reduced sweeping in the weekends, and that's primarily because we don't have the same level of carton in the weekends, so that reduces the amount of material. We're constantly reviewing the sweeping to see whether we have got the appropriate coverage. It's probably worth mentioning as well, on top of that, we do require our port users undertaking dusty activities to have their own sweeper trucks. So the wharf working area, a log vessel, for example, that gets swept every 4 hours by the stevedores operating in those areas. When there is a bulk discharge into hoppers of the dusty cargo, then those areas are swept continuously by the stevedores as well. So in real high risk times, we can order in more sweeper trucks. So on a given day, on a hard day, you could have 6 operating. Yeah.
May I also recognise the port's efforts in regards to environmental standards? Now, obviously, it's been a tough year for all of us, but actually, I want to commend you guys and your efforts over the course of the year. Yes, there have still been exceedances, but less than what there has been in the past, so well done. And we look forward to seeing no exceedances.
Thank you, Councillor Nees. Final question.
Thank you. Just want to recognise the efforts that you are making. Really appreciate that. It's much better for us to know that you are willingly working really hard to mitigate the impacts of your activities rather than us having to come in and play the heavy and abate your activities. But I guess the one question I haven't heard the answer to yet is what percentage of the port is still unsealed and what is your proposal to do that sealing?
I'm happy to answer that. And I joined the port in 2013 and we sealed the last part of the unsealed log yards in 2014. So there are no, with a very small exception, there is virtually no unsealed yards left at the port. And that's been the case for a while.
Is that all port land that you own, as opposed to land that you actually operate the port on? I know you've got other blocks of land.
No, there's 189 hectares there. I can't tell you the exact split. Probably 95% of that is owned and the rest is leased. The only exceptions to it would be the Kiwi Rail land adjacent to the port. There's some unsealed yards there. But look, I'm happy to stand to be corrected, but our understanding is that if you look at the container yards, the log yards, all the operating areas, there's virtually nothing left unsealed now, with the exception of the area that's in grass on Waimarie Street, obviously, that we don't use.
And with your indulgence, just one other question. Have you thought of using trees, which also clean the air and adjacent to your fences where they bound the roads? Might have. I just noticed over in, international ports, they use tree planting a lot to clean the impacts of heavy industry and transport.
It's a good question. I don't know to what extent they actually filter the air, but certainly along Totara Street, there was when the coal shed went in, there was a line of Hurikawa trees that were put in there, and we did consider it along Hewlett's Road as well. So it's something that we've the Hurikawa trees along Totara Street, we think they're great. Not just, I don't know to what extent they filter the air, but they certainly provide a good visual screen as well. The only thing, just closing off, happy to share this information with you in a presentation, but if anyone wants to come and view firsthand what we're doing, there's an invitation there. Happy to show people around. So.
Yeah, we had a drive around earlier in the year to all our dust monitoring sites. So most of us have a pretty good handle on where they are, what they're measuring. But thank you for your invitation, Dan. We may take you up on that yet. Final question, Councillor McDonald.
Kia ora kōrua. Not so much a question. I think it might be my questions for the Working Party, because they're rather dive questions. But firstly, I just want to commend the work that's been done by you to mitigate dust. But I guess just a reminder to all of us, this is still a journey that needs to be taken, and there are still solutions that we need to find that are challenging for all of us that will sit around the table to discuss this. So thank you.
Understand that, thank you.
So thank you, gentlemen, for coming in today. Great presentation. Really good to see the work you're doing. I think you've got a fair flavour from our councillors. More work to be done, Joey and Dan. We're not there yet, and we've got to do this together. Our community demands it of us. So thank you for your presentation, and have an enjoyable Christmas. Kia ora.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, next presentation is our new Harbourmaster, John Peters. I asked John to come along this morning just to talk about, introduce himself, taking over from Peter Buell, and welcome along, John. And you're just going to give us an introduction to the Maritime Summer. And it looks as though, John, hate to say it, but it's going to be busy.
Excuse me, I have a bit of a sore throat. Yeah. It is. I'm going to get to that. Toi whenua, toi tangata, toi moana, tihi maori. Greetings to everybody. So, let me introduce myself. My name is John Peters. I started my career about 31 years ago. I'm that old, in shipping, as a deck officer on super tankers. I sailed for 10 years, and then I came ashore after becoming a master mariner, a ship captain. I worked in various roles all over the world, actually. I was surveyor in Hong Kong, cargo superintendent in West Africa. My last role in Africa before I came back to New Zealand was the general manager of a port, similar to what we have here. Excuse me. I came back to New Zealand 5 years ago, and I worked with Maritime New Zealand as a maritime officer, which encompassed the role of the Taharua Harbourmaster. If you know the Taharua Iron Sands mine on the Kafia coast. I was also a ship inspector for Maritime New Zealand on the big ships we have calling our ports, as well as the New Zealand flagships, which is the Cook Strait ferries. I have been in this role for 1 month and 3 days, very early days yet. And the reason I chose this role was I wanted to be able to contribute meaningfully to the community. I live in Tauranga. My family is here, and I want to be something in a role where I could contribute. I am heading the maritime team. I hope this works. So, some of the functions we perform, we respond to emergencies, maritime emergencies, pollution emergencies. We also support the civil defense in a big way with our fleet of boats. We regulate commercial shipping and recreational boating, which I'll talk about a little later. We provide aids to navigation and we maintain them. We also use education with boat shows and other aquatic events. We make publications, brochures, also towards the education side. We remove hazards like driftwood and logs, which are quite often happening in our waterways. One of our big roles is to ensure the safety of our community on the water. And for this, we run maritime patrols. Currently, we have 2 boats excuse me, in the port of Tauranga, which are going around. First of all, they educate people and they also regulate the community. Our team is not very large, so we get contractors and contracted crew as well. This also applies to the lakes, where we also have boats running around doing the same function. In Pakatani, unfortunately, our skipper decided to join NPI, so I'm currently searching for somebody. And as Councillor Winter pointed out, this summer promises to be one of our busiest summers on record. Look at all those statistics. You will see that there's been a surge in the number of interactions we've had on water. 2020 as compared to 2019. On last Friday, we found there was an 83% increase in the number of interactions had on the waters as compared to last year for the same period. What's the cause of that? And you probably heard a lot in the media. One is Kiwis are not traveling overseas, so we have more money to spare. We have more time, and our beautiful bay attracts everybody. So that's what's happening. Our biggest problem, our potential problem, I would say, are jet skis, and you've heard a lot in the media about this. The fact is that they're cheaper to buy, don't require too much skill. So every youngster 15 years and above is jumping on a jet ski, thinks he's on a bicycle or a motorbike, and there he goes. So I'm trying to address that. As you may have observed, there's a bit of a push in media to try and get people to be aware of the hazards of using a jet ski. I know my pictures aren't very clear, but you can see that we are doing our best to try and hit all the areas we can get to. We also consider education as being a very important means of getting a message across. One problem I see is people from other areas, like a lot of the Aucklanders are coming here, they don't know our bylaws, they don't know our speed zones, so they're going crazy. So when we do meet these people, we chat with them and we assess the attitude, and often we just let them off with a warning because they don't know our areas. But then you have some cowboys, without any, who refuse to listen to the regulations. They do what they like, and every interaction our patrol boats have with them is captured on the camera. So their image, their details all go into a database. So if we get somebody with a repeat offender, my instruction is hit them with an infringement, because this guy is not safe. So for the education side, we have ramp education, where we have students talking to the public, talking to the community, and we have them all over the region. We have them in Bowentown, Turanga, Whakatane, and Rotorua. Another function we do is we try and keep our community safe again by monitoring public events, like fireworks, for example, over the water. We may close that area out. We make sure we check the plans. And from a maritime perspective, we make sure it's all safe. Councillor Winter has asked me to talk about our fleet. So there you have it. We have 9 boats and 3 jet skis. That's the Mocha, the Kura, the Kaha, the jet skis, and the Awanui. What happened? Yeah, you got it. That's right. So that's the Taniva, the Ra, the Whakatane 3, the Bay Patroller, and the Matadai. Now, apart from our normal functions, we also make sure that we support the police and other government authorities for search and rescue, recovery of fatalities, and also NPI if they have any kind of operation happening. I mean, thank you very much. Any questions? I'll take them up.
Thank you, John. Any questions to our new Harbourmaster? Welcome aboard, Sue.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, State Councillor Rose and Chairman Leader.
Yeah, I just wanted to start off by saying welcome. Of course, I've seen you around a couple of times, so it's good to have you come and meet the rest of the councillors. But I just wanted to ask in regards to, obviously, a Portkey is having its harbour built, but also there's, correct me if I'm wrong, Eastern Bay councillors, but there's been an increase in the amount of people coming in and out of the Portkey Harbour. So is there any plans on potentially sending people through to a Portkey over the course of the summer, or no?
Well, Councillor, actually, as a matter of fact, I was supposed to be in Whakatane tomorrow, and I'm going there. So it's still very early days for me, but you have a point. We're supposed to be having a workshop tomorrow in Whakatane, which I was supposed to attend. That's been postponed. Nevertheless, that is one of my areas of focus, where we are going to strengthen our team there. We'll probably have it all in place before next summer. But as you can imagine, it's not easy getting these things in place. But yes, thank you for bringing that up.
Chairman Leader.
Thank you, Chairman. Just on the Portkey Bar, the Portkey Bar is notoriously bad. I wouldn't invite any out of locals to go there. Frequently, locals go head over bow on that bar. And we're waiting improvement to that facility. The question is the Taniwha. The Taniwha was originally put into recess, and the proposal was to give it to Naitarangi in terms of some facilitation. I understand the background to that, but it's come back into the fold. Has it come back as a permanent vessel? And because it originally was proposed to be retired out of the fleet, what sort of hours do we get out of both those, the Taniwha and the Awanui, on an annualised basis, if we're going to use both?
I can leave to that, Mr. Lawrence, to answer. Yeah, thank you.
Through you, Chair. In response to the first part of that question for Taniwha, the vessel was leased to Naitarangi for a 3-year period. Naitarangi were having difficulties in going through the MOS certification process for the vessel, and also making sure they had enough trained skippers to do the work that they wanted. And we also had the mortality decisions coming up. So we took Taniwha back into the fleet, have upgraded her so that she's ready to do offshore work over at Motiti if required, and have offered to Naitarangi that any time that they need her on the water to do some work, and the work that they had originally planned for, that we would support them through that and provide the skippers. And that means that we do the MOS certification ourselves. In terms of the hours of service for Taniwha and Awanui, I can't answer that question.
Chairman, I can't tell you right now, but I can get back to you on that. That's right.
Thank you. Councillor White and then Councillor Eating, and then we'll call it close.
Yeah, thank you and welcome. My question does relate to iwi involvement, and obviously, you know, where I represent around the Rotorua Lakes region, there's lots of lakes, and the lakes got co-governance and the ownership of the lake bed. There's lots of hapu, lots of kids in the water. Not too many of them own boats, I have to say. But there was a real safety issue around that space. Do you involve iwi in this? Because if there's a tragedy on the lakes, obviously they'll place a rāhui on those lakes, which means that that just puts some limits on it. Do you work with the iwi much in this space, or are you intending to? You've only been in there a month.
The intention is to get more involved. Still very early days for me, so I won't make any comments now. But yes, I am aware of the sentiments and the sensitive areas, and yes, we will take into consideration. But just give me some time, because I'm still finding my way around.
Councillor Eating.
Kia ora, Mr. Chair. Kia ora, John. Great to have you here, and I'll just, because you are new, I'm going to put a plug in for Ohiwa Harbour. It's a particular place that the population in that area swells by like 300%, I think, full of Aucklanders. And last summer, Every time I went to Ohiwa Harbour with my kids and we do stand-up paddleboarding and so forth, you'll see teenagers hooning on jet skis. And so I would be really interested at the end of this summer to see some statistics around about infringements. I know you're looking for a new harbour, is it a harbour?
A skipper.
A skipper, yeah. Out in Whakatane, but certainly I would be really interested in seeing what those numbers are, because anecdotally, every time I go there, there's always somebody hooning on a jet ski. Heading out to sea, but it's 5 knots, 200 metres from the shore, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, just Ohiwa Harbour.
Thanks, Councillor. I will take that up. In fact, I'm going there tomorrow, so I'll talk to my Harbourmaster and see whether we can concentrate on that area, because the whole idea is to reduce accidents or eliminate them completely, and hooning is a big problem.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
It's a very technical term, hooning, isn't it? Thank you very much, John. Good luck for the team this year, this summer, and thank you for your presentation. Really good to keep councillors up to date on the work that this maritime team do, so thank you for your presentation. Okay, councillors, we're going to move to page 22, the committee chairperson's report. It's open for discussion. Are there any questions? I'll take it as read. Any questions on the chairperson's report? A lot of it is work in progress. You'll be pleased to see Councillor Von Dadelson, the Tauranga Moana offset project update. You asked for that last meeting. Sarah, just in terms of Tauranga City is resolved to connect all remaining Tauranga City marae to reticulation. Do we have a number in Tauranga City that they're looking at?
That's 4, Chair.
And for Western Bay, did we have a number there that they're looking to?
5.
5. Very good sign language from the back. That's marvellous. Thank you. Any other questions on Councillor Rose?
So I just wanted to ask about the new cameras and or the new camera and the port key.
Yep.
Could we? Oh God, I forgot the question.
Yeah, it was.
Just explain, please.
A disappointment. Let's put it that way. That Doc said, "No way, Jose." But I think when the new harbour wharf goes in, there will be one installed then. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Who else do I have a question from? Councillor McDonald?
Just back to the Malai Osset program.
Yep.
We appear to have sorted out Maiwao and the Western Bay sub-region, but my understanding that this was actually a regional project, so I would like to know what is going now to happen for the other sub-regions. How are we now going to progress it now across the region?
Through you, Chair, we will look to bring a paper early next year to Monitoring and Ops about how that might get phased out, what the outcomes would be and potential costs of doing that work for the committee to consider.
Work in progress, Councillor McDonald. Any other questions? Councillor Nees?
Yes, thank you. On page 27, you report on a joint project with New Zealand Avocado, NZ, KGI and the Regional Council to streamline that process to remove seasonal restrictions. Are we managing any clawback on water takes in that area, particularly in theoretically over-allocated catchments?
Through you, Chair, we can bring that information back to this committee. I don't have it at hand.
That would be good. And just one other question. We report on our analysis of samples within 1 month on page 31. I just wonder, is that the right sort of time frame, or would ideally we want to deliver results on samples in less than 1 month? I'm just concerned that it's a long time to know a long time lapse between when the sample was taken and when we know what the results were.
Through you, Chair, we ensure that we prioritise samples where the results are urgent, like bathing water quality, or where samples could deteriorate so they can't be analysed. That delay allows for some of the long-term monitoring that doesn't need to be reported urgently, and where samples can be frozen. And also some samples do take a long time to go through the analysis process, but urgent samples are done where the results are required: water quality, drinking water, E. coli and bathing.
So you've got different levels of service for different sorts of water treatment. Great, thank you.
Councillor Thompson?
Mr. Chairman, Sarah, is it possible to create an app for the pollution hotline?
Oh, gosh. We're trying to start. I think the answer is...
Kia ora, good morning, everybody. The honest answer is I'm not technically able to sort of say yes or no, but I am very willing to investigate that because I believe it would be a very handy tool for the community. There are apps out there already, such as Atella, which I believe works particularly well for TCC. But if council would like me to investigate the viability of that, I'm willing to do it.
Mr. Chairman, I would very much like to propose that staff do investigate that. I believe it could be a bit of a game changer. So thank you, Stephen. Hopefully the council will support that.
So you envisage it coming, I mean, we have the 0800 number hotline for verbal reports. So you would envisage an app that you could take a photo, time, date, place, venue, fire it in, that sort of thing, Councillor Thompson? Correct, okay. Right, steer, investigate.
Definitely investigate. I realise a few people are complaining about how long it takes to put their calls through, so it'd be a great aid to the community if we do something quick.
Yeah, investigate, bring it back to us, please. Yeah, cool. Any further questions, Councillor Clark?
No, just a quick statement. I propose the app. As the council's aware that Opotiki now has got an app, so that people are in fault on the beach hooning around with the app clip, and it goes straight to the Opotiki council and passed straight on to Opotiki police. So I mean, it's an instant response. So it's good on Opotiki. Technical initiative. The rest of the bank's got to catch up.
Inundated by innovation in the Eastern Bay here this morning. My goodness. Thank you, Councillor Clark. Okay. The Chairman's report, just that final page there on the Provincial Growth Fund, just updating you on all the different projects right across the region. Some of them have been completed, which is great to see. Councillor Nees, you had a question?
I'm not sure whether I should declare a conflict of interest here or not, because the trust I'm associated with has got a PGF grant.
Oh, no, you don't have a conflict of interest. This is just reporting what's going on around the region. And how the work in progress is happening. Some haven't started, but I guess that's part of the process is that it takes time to get these projects underway. But pleasing, some have been completed. Councillor Love.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I understand that the problem with these provisional growth fund grants is they have to be completed within the timescale laid down by when the grant was approved. We know that some of them haven't started yet, and it was going to cause great embarrassment to us and to everybody if we lose the funding because we haven't completed the work. So I think from the risk point of view, we've really got to make sure that we keep a very good handle on what's happening in this area.
And that's why it's reporting back here, Councillor Love, that we can keep an eye on this. I mean, there's a whole lot of different governance structures there that the money's been granted to. Some of them are beyond our control, but at least we know the overall picture right across the bay.
Just coming back to Mr. Winfrey, I think it would be more useful if the table would include the percentage of work completed and also the timescale for the finite timescale for completion of the project.
Can we do that? We'll give it a go, Dave. Thank you. Any further questions on the Chair's report? It's been moved. I'd like to move on page 22. Do I have a seconder for the Chairperson's report? Councillor Rose. Any further discussion? All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, carried. Morning tea. Thanks. Adjourn the meeting. Page 35, Mount Maunganui Industrial Air Update. We've got Reece and Stephen. Welcome along, gentlemen. Tell me some good news.
The port are working very hard to reduce their dust levels, and I thought that was a very good presentation, and it's good to see the work that we're doing is influencing the work the port is doing.
Marvellous, thank you. So, report taken as read. Is there anything you want to speak to, Stephen?
No, we'll just take it as read. Any questions, please, Councillor?
Yes. Councillor Rose?
In regards to page, where is it? Page 39, you've said that the Clearview Community Group has launched a petition against Regional Council granting consent. Do we have numbers of how many have signed that petition to date, or no?
Through the Chair, I don't have the current numbers with me, but I'd be willing to find that out and get it to you later on today. If that was.
And also, councillors, you'll see attachment 3. You've received by email and in Stella the minutes of the Mount Maunganui Air Quality Working Party meeting on the 7th of December. Hopefully that's in your inbox. Councillor Needs.
Thank you. On page 37, you report about the concerns around Blake Park and the sporting facilities, and you note that we've got equipment, but it's not being fed into the council's NES reporting. Is that because it's outside the airshed?
No, the monitor is in the airshed. The quality of the data that we get is not for, it's not up there with the evidence we'd use perhaps in court. It's an indicator.
Right.
So that monitor is a little bit different. It only measures TSP, which is total dust, rather than solely PM10, TSP, all the different kind of the gold standard that we have in the other monitors.
Right.
So that monitor kind of stands apart as an indicator. It gives us an idea of, on that community facility, what the dust levels will be.
Have we any plans to upgrade that?
We are having a meeting, I'm meeting Shane tomorrow from Science to talk about putting PM10 in there. But as I sit here, I don't know about the logistics of that and whether it's possible. I'm just going to search it out and see if we can.
Okay, thank you. And one other question, thank you for the reports on the consents and the applications that are in process. So I presume the large numbers being driven by the airshed implementation, or are these just consents that are coming up normally anyway?
I would say normally anyway, but the process is just a little bit different when you have an airshed.
Yeah.
You're obviously not allowed to add to the dust burden within the airshed.
Okay, so just very aware of the discussions that are happening around Roe and Rye and the investigations into a managed retreat. Is that being taken into consideration as we're considering the consents, or are we completely disregarding that by way of terms, etc.?
I'd like to defer that to Sarah.
Through you, Chair, because the managed retreat is a scoping study at the moment, and it is part of the longer term work being done around the Mount airshed, but also the wider Mount community together with Tauranga City Council. It's not part of what consent processing officers could consider at this stage, and we're not expecting a scoping report until about mid next year that might be able to inform some of those discussions.
So potentially we may be in a situation where we are granting consent for a relatively long term, which may prevent any achievement of a meaningful managed retreat.
One of the issues around that Stephen's just mentioned, and the difficulty with the airshed and the consenting framework now, and making sure we don't contribute or add additional burden in the polluted airshed, has meant that the consents team have looked at conditions on all consents in that area that allow for a call-in or a review clause because of that uncertainty.
So that will be included in all of these consents.
It is currently being included in all consents.
Thank you very much.
So Stephen, you used the term gold-plated airshed monitoring equipment to give our community satisfaction that we've got the best air quality equipment available. Is that correct? You couldn't do any better than what we've got. That's the question.
It's completely my understanding from the science team that we have the best monitoring equipment in those monitoring locations. That's why I use that term.
Thank you. Councillor Rose, Councillor Leader.
I just wanted to point out that, yes, we might have the best air quality monitoring stations in the country or in the world, whatever it is. But it's cool, we're monitoring that, but actually, how are we ensuring that we're moving forward in that space? Because our community are now watching, and they've got eagle eyes on us. So we need to be sure that the stuff we're doing in regards to this air quality is actually up there. I'm concerned about hearing consents being approved with conditions, and actually how are we going to ensure that those conditions are clearly put out there, if they're able to be put out there, to our community, because the community are going to see that we've granted the consent and they're going to go, oh, what the heck, regional council aren't doing their job properly. So how are we going to be able to ensure that our community understands why we're granting these consents and actually how we're making sure these conditions are met?
Through you, Chair, we do have the Mount program that Reece and Stephen are reporting on that brings work across the whole of the regional council with a focus on improving air quality in the Mount. We, over the next 3 to 6 months, will be working on an action plan to identify which parts of how all parts of the organisation contribute to improving air quality. And that's going to form part of a really important messaging with the community so that they know what the consents process is, they know how that contributes to the overall protection of air quality, and it's the same with our compliance monitoring. It's really important for Stephen's team to be monitoring compliance of those consent conditions, which they do. We've got dedicated staff down at the Mount. And also that the policy mechanisms are in place, and that's some work that this committee will be doing with the strategy committee to make sure that both the short-term and long-term goals for our community are met.
Chairman Leader.
Thanks, Chair. Look, Sarah's just started the debate that I wanted to put on the table, and I just want to urge a word of caution in terms of setting a public expectation that unless we're really slick in terms of the way we do policies and the procedures, we're not going to meet. So in terms of the air quality around the Mount, we're currently dealing with a situation where a lot of this stuff is permitted activity, but you're going to move into a regime whereby it's going to be a consented activity. When I look at the schedule of events in terms of PM10 exceedances that have happened in the last 12 months, I think there's only one there that has been decided to date in terms of a discernible, that is the cause. The problem is the public, whenever these PM10 exceedances occur, they have an expectation that we as the regulator know where the problem is. The fact is that in most of them, I'll see here, we don't. So when you get to a consented regime, unless you can sheet home to the exacerbator that they caused the event, then you've got your hands tied behind your back. So I just think we, as you said, Sarah, in terms of communication with the public, we really have to be quite good at this. I think the term in terms of the contributors to some of these PM10 exceedances, anthropogenic, I think the word is. So, and yes, you can break down to the community and say we didn't take action on this one because A, we couldn't sheet home any exacerbator or liability to a particular entity. You're going to raise an expectation in terms of all these that we can do something about it, and you're going to have the flashest equipment in the world. But the first port of call is, was that monitor working properly and calibrated properly on the day that the event occurred?
Thank you. Councillor Von Danielson and then McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I totally concur with Chairman Leader on this. We have expectation, public expectation becomes very high, especially when they see that even the word managing retreat of industry, the cost to do this sort of activity would is likely, if it proceeded, would likely be a huge burden on ratepayers or central government. And getting money out of central government, we know is not high. I think what we should be doing is congratulating both our staff and industry for recognising that there are issues here and that we are doing something. I was really heartened to hear Port Tauranga recognising social their social licence to operate, and I think that they're taking very good first steps, and we need to encourage them and other industries to do so further, rather than look at ways to build unrealistic expectation from the public. This is a very hard airshed to manage because of its location to open water, as salt air for a start. So a lot of this can be beyond the control of any one individual company. And I just think we really do need to take care, but at the same time, I personally want to thank staff for taking a proactive approach. We've spent a lot of money in the last 3 years on upping our game with monitors. These are expensive, around about, I think it's something like $500,000 a pop, 270 to 1,000 to $500,000 each. So it's a big cost. You might like to remind me and clarify what it is. But well done, staff. I think we're on the right track, but let's just be very sensible how we approach this.
Yeah, I think it's $500,000 a year in monitoring costs, Stephen. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
And look, Andrew, I concur with your comments and Chairman Leaders. That's why I wanted that presentation this morning from the port. We're all in this together. They're making good progress, but you all needed to see the progress. So when you're talking to your different community leaders across the countryside, there's the evidence that the port is actually doing a whole lot of stuff in terms of mitigation, adaptation, spending a lot of money in terms of what their social responsibility. So yes, we can commend the port, and yes, we can commend our staff, because it's those conversations that our staff have got to have with those different users down there to say, hey, you're part of the problem, but you're also part of the solution. Councillor McDonald.
Kia ora. Look, I can concur with the comments that have just been made. To some extent, I agree with Chairman Leader and Councillor Von Danielson. And I just want to say that around the public expectation, of course there is a public expectation. This is a hot topic, not just locally, regionally, it's also nationally and globally. So, let's get our heads around this and just remind us that we're just one party in the equation that needs to be part of the solution. I mean, I even take issue that it's entirely the fault of industries. Well, it's not. it's also the fault that local government has played in poor town planning. I mean, if we want to get to the core of what's happened here, let's put the responsibility where it lies. And this was one of the things I made clear at the Mount Industrial meeting. We are not here to start out at berating one another. We are here to find a solution to the problem that our public are experiencing and having to live in. So let's not come to the table, pointing fingers of who it is. I can understand why industries are there. They've been allowed to there by poor town planning. And it continues with the regulatory rules that we are having to abide by. So yes, we are constrained as a regional council to some extent, but where the hell is our influence in speaking with local government and saying we do have a problem? I believe we have a problem in the level of emissions that are being allowed to occur under the NES for air quality. But the problem is, we've got another institution who is lagging in their responsibility, I feel, which is the health area, in checking out the impact on health that these emissions are causing. And unless we all contribute to the whole of what the solution is going to be, this is going to go on and it's going to be an issue for our constituents. So we've all got to take on this responsibility. And we're not putting down staff. I think staff are doing an exemplary job. But I feel that we as the governors around this table are not doing our job. We're not using the influence of this council to bring in the players that are needed to resolve this issue. And I think we should be asking central government to play a bigger part. Where is EPA when we start to talk about methyl bromide? Why aren't they sitting at that table and presenting to us? Because we're getting blamed for a lot of responsibility that lies with them. But our public doesn't know that. So they need to be at the table as well. Central government needs to be here talking to us. We can't do this alone and we shouldn't be blamed entirely. But we have to own up to the responsibility that perception by public is that we're lagging and we're lacking. I just hope that this working party that we've set up is the body that can help our communities that sit there to understand the industries and other players to understand each of our roles they'll play. So, there is a public expectation of what our role is, and there should be. Because I live in that community too, and I have real issues. And I'm not afraid to say in there that we as a regional council have a role to play. And one of the things that we're going to hear at the next meeting is that role and responsibility. And I guess my question to all of us here today, we know what our regulatory role, because we've heard us, we've used thousands of dollars. But where is our responsibility to our communities under the Local Government Act? How far are we pushing with that envelope to resolve some of these health issues that are raised? It may not primarily be our role to address health issues, but we have a responsibility under the Local Government Act around the well-being of our public. So where is the research on that matter? I'm not saying that Sarah should be posed because she's got enough in the regulatory role, but why isn't our strategy and policy looking at the role that we play under the Local Government Act? And so, my plea is, well, let's have a look what our role is, because I hope when we go back to the working group that those of us who represent regional council are able to say, well, this is our role and responsibility as a regulator, and here is our role and responsibility under the Local Government Act.
Thank you, Councillor McDonald. And I think in the next paper, Councillor McDonald wrote her airshed as a bit of a success story on that program that's been going for 15 years. And these are difficult equations, solutions that we have to come up with, but with Marion and her team and Rotorua Air Quality Working Party, we're actually nailing it. So we'll come to that, Marion. Okay, any more questions on the Mount Maunganui Industrial Area update?
Just one more comment, Chair. You're just following on from Councillor McDonald. It's a fine line between patting ourselves on the back and getting a kick in the bum. And I think we just need to be aware of the challenges and the depth of further investigation that much more has been raising, because it's not going to go away, as we know.
Oh, no.
So, and we all know that. but just just shifting our consciousness to the fact that there's a lot of work to be done. We congratulate ourselves on the good work that's been done in monitoring and the efforts that have been done by the port, but it's quite a long way to go yet before the public are going to be satisfied with where we're at, and we will get the can.
There's a recommendation on page 35. Would somebody like to move? Councillor Crosby, seconded by Councillor Nees. Any further discussion? I'll put that resolution. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Motion is carried. Thank you, Amanda. Moving on to page 52. Marion, thank you. Thank you, Reece. Air quality, Rotorua airshed boundary extension. Thank you, Marion, for bringing this fairly quickly to us, because we had our airshed meeting about 3 weeks ago, and we saw that there was an issue within the Rotorua community in terms of new subdivisions coming on stream. And because the airshed is gazetted as the defined area, we could foresee, I don't want to take away your powder, Marion, but we could foresee that these subdivisions were outside the airshed area and they're allowed to put in burners, which sort of defeats the whole purpose of why we had it. Over to you, Marion.
Through you, Chair. Thank you for that. So the map up there shows the black outline, which defines everything within that black outline is the Rotorua airshed. And there are subdivisions that you'll see on that map that sit just outside that airshed. So the role of the Rotorua Air Quality Working Party is to seek out and encourage a reduction in particulate matter in the Rotorua airshed. And it was the Working Party's initiative to have this report come to the committee today, as they are concerned that smoke from wood burners installed outside the airshed in those new subdivisions, that smoke would drift into the airshed and increase the concentration level of particulate matter. So the Working Party is bringing this matter to your attention because Rotorua Lakes Council cannot restrict wood burner consent applications outside the airshed boundary. The Working Party is keen to protect the air quality gains that they have already made, and they want to stop new sources of particulate matter flowing in to the airshed. The Working Party supports extending the Rotorua airshed boundary to include these subdivisions. And the Working Party understands that this would require a recommendation from this committee to Council Strategy and Policy Committee, and ask that you consider your initiative. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Marion. We're looking at those subdivisions highlighted, but what if in future years there are more subdivisions coming on stream? Do we have to change the boundary lines every time a subdivision comes in, or can we say this boundary is going to be automatically increased if a new subdivision is granted?
You do have to define the boundary, but what the strategy and policy will do when they investigate this, if the recommendation goes through, is they will work with Rotorua Lakes Council, find where the scheduled development is, and they will future-proof so that it's captured.
That's what I want to hear, future-proof. Okay. Report is open for discussion. Any questions to Marion and Reece? No? Councillor Brunning?
It would probably be rather draconian, I suppose, but when you've got a new subdivision area, wouldn't you be trying to encourage them or banning them from having fires at all? With modern homes and insulation, it's almost self-defeating. And okay, you can half the amount of smoke in an airshed, but double the number of houses that are doing it, you've achieved nothing. So, any response to that?
Through you, Chair. That would be what we would ideally like to do, and we talked about this with Rotorua Lakes Council to see if they could do this, but they came back to us and said legally they can't do that. And so the only way they can legally do that is to include those subdivisions within the Rotorua airshed. They are already receiving building consent applications for solid fuel burners
for those properties.
Great. Anyway, so there's a resolution on page 53. Would somebody like to move? Councillor Rose, seconded by Councillor Von Dadelson. Any further discussion? I'll put that resolution. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, carried. Over to you, Paula. It's coming to your committee.
Thank you.
Moving on to focus catchment updates on page 58. I've got Jackson. Welcome along, Jackson.
Chair.
You've got a presentation here for us too, Jackson.
Yep.
Do you want me to introduce Jackson?
Yep, yes, sure.
Jackson's the catchments expert working under Monty, and this is our focus catchments work that's been going on for about 18 months now, and this is really our first report back to this committee on the progress.
Over to you, Jackson.
Thank you. So traditionally, our land management program operated responsibly with those willing in the community who were seeking our support. And this was great for those properties, but our efforts were never concerted enough in any one location to have a real chance of achieving water quality outcomes. So in 2019, we revised our land management program to align with the long-term plan KPI to improve swimmability in key waterways across the region, and to help give effect to the implementation of the essential freshwater policy package that was emerging at the time. The program is entirely voluntary. We use incentives and education to achieve change ahead of the regulatory reform that will happen over the next 5 to 10 years. Our work has been narrowed down into 11 at-risk focus catchments. These catchments have been selected based on one of the key water quality attributes like nitrogen, phosphorus, sediment, or coli, showing a deteriorating trend over time. And we've also considered the ecological health of our sensitive receiving environments like estuaries in selecting these catchments. So to successfully get greater uptake of work in these catchments, we're funding at a higher rate the highest priority actions on the ground. That's been really successful to get buy-in from people that may not otherwise have worked with us in the past. And our general approach is that we're doing more investigation and research into the causes of the water quality issues so that we can develop tailored catchment action plans to deliver our on-the-ground action. In the strategy and policy workshop, you've considered the timeline of the essential freshwater policy program over the next 5 years. So on-the-ground action won't be achieved for a number of years in that space, but our land management program is happening now ahead of that regulatory reform. So it's a great opportunity to get the community on board. These are the 11 focus catchments that we're currently working in. Every one is very unique in its communities and the land uses that are driving the water quality concerns. And each catchment has a different history of work with the council, so we're on different trajectories in each catchment. The types of issues we're addressing, anything from bacterial contamination of pipi beds in the Waitahi through to nitrate leaching on the Palmer soils of the Taupo catchment, near the Upper Rangataki, sorry. We have sediment problems in places like Waikato Estuary and, of course, bathing sites like Kaihu Falls with bacterial contamination that we're addressing. We're putting a real focus on determining the cause of the issues, using things like fecal source tracking to determine where the bacterial contamination is coming from. And we're, as well as monitoring the water quality, we're looking at the effectiveness of our mitigations that we're delivering. So whenever possible, we're monitoring through things like constructed wetlands, or if we're upgrading drains to a best practice standard. Stock exclusion has always been a huge part of our program, and with the COVID-related funds from the government, we've leveraged a significant ramping up of our stock exclusion fencing program with much bigger setbacks than usual to achieve reduction of sediment and bacteria in waterways. And we're also administering 1 billion trees funding from MPI to support the national program of tree planting with an emphasis on right tree in the right place. and other things in the toolbox, like detainment bunds, which are really successful for removing phosphorus and sediment from steep land catchments. Farm environment planning is on the horizon as a mandatory requirement over the next 5 years, and some of our community voluntarily championing that now and working with us on farm environment plans ahead of that regulatory requirement. And industry, our industry partners in the dairy and horticultural sector are well on board with co-run field days with farmers in these focus catchments. And ultimately, the momentum that we're seeing in the catchment groups is building, and they'll get their peers on board to achieve great buy-in to our programs. So as we go through the next few years, we might refine the location of our focus catchments depending on where the community demands are and the highest water quality concerns that we need to address.
Jackson, this is the diagram here you're showing is on page 61 of the agenda that didn't print out properly. That's correct.
Sorry about that. That's right. Yeah.
No problem. We're just making sure we've got the right data.
Yeah.
Carry on.
So ultimately, we're using our incentives-based approach to achieve water quality outcomes, but over the next 5 or 10 years, there will be regulatory reform that will take over, and compliance with rules and regulations may be required to achieve change if we can't achieve it through our incentive-based land management program. Thank you.
Cool, thank you. Jackson, is there one, I know it's early days, is there one catchment that is standing out as an exemplar? You might not want to answer that question, but is there one saying, yep, everybody's on board and they're making really good progress? Is there one that stands out?
They all, to be honest, they all have in their own way things going on, but yeah, we could pick a local example like the Kaiti Falls, where our swimming hole is, where there's a huge amount of on-the-ground work happened, over 6-10 kilometres of new fencing just in the last season to keep stock out of waterways above the falls.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Questions, councillors? Councillor Clark.
Yeah, Jackson, I'm interested to see the range of tools you've got in your toolbox, but I guess one thing that did concern me, I didn't see any emphasis there at all on bioremediation. There's an awful lot of work going on in the space around biochars and chips and miscanthus grasses and the whole lot. What sort of progress are we making, looking to see if there's any benefit to be gained from that methodology?
Through Mr. Chair, we're watching that space closely. We're not currently incentivising any of that work through our environmental grants policy, but we could adapt over time as the effectiveness of those things are proven and confirmed.
Thank you. Councillor Von Danielson, E.G. and then these.
Yeah, thank you for that. Can I commend you on the work and having a focus on specific catchments, working one at a time to actually get improvement. If you try to do everything for everyone, you won't achieve anything. I think this focused approach is absolutely the right way to go. I'll declare an interest in that. I am the chair of the Rotary Trust that helps support the Kaparua Valley wetland redevelopment, and our trust alone has put in close to $2 million into that venture, and it's really good to see the Bay of Plenty Regional Council supporting us strongly, supporting this valley strongly. This is a valley that's right actually within the city boundaries, so it's accessible to a lot of people, and it's been fantastic, and I'm really glad to see that it is one of the focus catchments. But that approach of being focused is what I'm going to commend you on, rather than a scattergun approach. So well done.
Councillor Eating.
Kia ora, Mr. Chair. My question is just regarding one of the PGF funds that we got around the fencing. I mean, just haven't seen it through these reports. I'm just wondering over the region how we're doing and where that's at.
Mr. Engel. I'm assuming you were speaking about the MFE funding. There's actually a media release just gone out this morning from the Minister celebrating the fact that they've put money into this focus catchment program to the tune of $3 million over the next 2 years. I guess our operations staff have known that that was in the offing for some time, so that although the announcement's been made today, we've been working under the assumption that we have that resource to add to our own resource. But it basically means this program's on steroids for the next 2 years, and we're going to get twice as much done because of the investment of central government.
Councillor Nees.
Thank you. I just wanted to congratulate you on an excellent report. Very informative, and there's certainly a lot to digest. My question is around our reporting. At some point, I'd like to see more financial reporting about what we're investing in the different catchments, focus catchments, you know, what percentages on funding to landowners and what their matching fund is, and also what our monitoring plans are to check the success of our interventions. Just moving on further on the reporting, I'd just love to see under climate change that we're actually identifying what carbon we're sequestering through the planting program. That's the first time I've ever seen that in one of our reports, and I think that's the sort of hard information that we need to be capturing and then collating across the organisation so we can actually see the real impacts of the work that we're doing. So keep that up. I'd love to see that compiled for all of our planting work. With regard to the Billion Trees Fund, I just go back to my old favourite again on can we utilise some of that funds for planting in our regional parks. For example, with the Papamoa Regional Park, there's surely quite a large area that could be planted with Indigenous trees to develop carbon sinks that could be used for offsets for our own organisational emissions. And I understand that everything we do at the Papamoa Regional Park is through agreement with our iwi partners, but I'm sure that there are places where we could do further planting which wouldn't impact on the cultural sites, it wouldn't impact on the view shafts, etc. So can you tell us, is there likely to be any utilisation of the Billion Trees Fund in our own regional parks?
Quite by chance, we have a presentation by Courtney Bell coming up on the regional park, the Papamoa Hills. So could we just defer the answer to that for when Courtney arrives? Thank you.
But in terms of your other questions, Jane, about costs and percentages, landowners, I'm sure we can get that data available for you as this progresses. It's early days, but you know, this is, I'm sure Jackson's taken it on board to bring that back. Thank you. Any further? Oh, I've got Councillors Leader and then Brunning. Chairman Leader, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Jackson, following on from Councillor Eaty's comment about some of the MFE funding and some of our own funding, which is co-funding as well, are there any pipeline issues in terms of materials materialising? Secondly, are there any capacity and capability issues in terms of people doing the job, especially in terms of planting and fencing? And thirdly, are our land management team running an audit program to see that what we bought, we're actually getting, so that when there's an external audit potentially coming down the pipeline on us, we're not left looking a bit embarrassed?
Yeah, thank you, through Chair. We haven't seen any supply issues so far with fencing materials. We are in a good position to order ahead for the plants that we need to purchase so they can be grown on contract. There is a lot of work that needs to happen in a short period of time, so contractor availability has been an issue in some areas, especially further out in the remote areas, but we do have an opportunity to stage the works over 2 years, so we're confident that we have the right people on the books, and if not, we've relaxed some of our or offered to support some of our procurement approaches to enable more people to get on board. And yeah, we will be audited on the delivery of this work, and we have we're setting in place measures to check back regularly on the progress of things and keep records and meet that requirement. I'm confident we'll be able to deliver the program within 2 years for MFE.
Thank you. Happy with that. Councillor Brunning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, just on the E. coli, it's not a question. It's just there are questions around E. coli in my mind as a measuring way of measuring those bugs, and finding the source is difficult. And a lot of work has been done up the Waitoa area there with little results, but hopefully what's being done now will make a difference. But the continuing research around that, and I see ESR involved now in doing some work, I think that's critically important, because I'd hate to see us get down another 10 years and then some new data comes forward that says that was not quite correct what we did. So just that concern there. And I just want to ask, around the Waitoa, there was a forestry block at the head of that had cattle running around in it. I'm not sure whether it was Māori owned or not. Do you know if those cattle have been removed?
Yeah, I understand that the cattle have been removed now, only recently in the last couple of months. And obviously, using a coli as a measure of swimmability is on the radar nationally as an appropriateness, and we're working with the ESR as are all the councils on what the best measure of swimmability really is.
Okay, if there's no further questions, the resolution on page 58, just reportedly taken as read and received, moved by Councillor Brunning, seconded by Councillor Clark. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Each carried. Thank you, Jackson. Keep up the good work. You've heard the comments, and we'll be hearing more from you. Cheers. Moving on to Rivers and Drainages update, we've got Kirsty Brown. Welcome along, Kirsty.
Thank you.
This is on page 73.
Kia ora, everyone. Yeah, we have a significant program of work in the rivers and drainage area this financial year. So this report is for your information and provides the committee an update on some key projects and works to date. So I'd like to take the report as read.
Yes.
And answer any questions.
Any questions on Kirsty? And probably all, Chris. Councillor Nees.
Firstly, you didn't cover it in your report, but when will the Kaituna scheme classification review be underway? Is that proposed to be starting soon? It was programmed in for this year.
The spend.
This is the work Simon Harris is doing.
Yes, so it's going out for tender early next year. The sheet piles have been manufactured, but there are shipping issues with the COVID environment that we're in, but we are expecting them to arrive beginning of February. So yeah, out for tender early next year, and works are expected to commence late April.
Oh, I had a question about that too. That's the Kaituna Mole.
Yeah.
Yeah. So will we be closing the fishing area? So what have we got in place to let people know about that? I know it's very well used and valued.
So yes, part of the work staff are doing is working with the comms team to make sure we've got a good comms release information going out.
Kirsty, just
sorry.
You have a very soft voice, so just.
And just in terms of the Simon Harris work, so he's an economist, a contractor that's doing work on the rating, and particularly in respect of the Nongata and the work we've commenced up there, making sure the right ratepayers are paying the right amount towards that work. I think that's been delayed several times, hasn't it, Kirsty? So we're just waiting on some information at the moment, is that right?
Yes, that's correct. We've had to extend it out. We should have a draft end of May.
Just with respect, having been at the River Scheme Advisor advisory meetings when this was first discussed and before it came to the annual plan, asking for this to be sped up or accelerated. Part of their concern was around Papamoa, and the need for Tauranga City Council ratepayers to be paying more to contribute to the scheme. So it isn't just about Ngoi Kaha, it's actually down the other end of the catchment too.
Yes, that's correct. The Bell Road catchment is included in the review.
And Kirsty, on page 78, you talk about the rock procurement. Have those meetings been held? You said they were going to be by mid-December.
Yes, they're underway now.
Making progress?
I think so. I need to touch base with Paula, but yes.
Any further questions? Councillor Easy.
Kia ora, Mr. Chair, kia ora, Kirsty. Just wondering around the Tauranga River up in Waimana, and if there's any updates on what we were discussing earlier in the year regarding the flood water storage and some of the shifts we're going to be happening in that space.
I don't know that there has been progress on that, to be honest, Councillor. I think that's probably, is this more the river scheme sustainability work that Mark Townsend's leading? I think some conversations have begun, but it's going slower than expected.
Any further questions? Okay, there's a resolution on page 73. Report be received. Could I move it, please? Councillor White, seconded by Councillor Von Dellison. All those in favour, please say aye. It's carried. Annual Care Group Summary Report. This is Rusty and Rusty. Welcome along.
I'm not sure, councillors, if you've met Rusty before, so I better introduce him properly. Rusty is another of Pim's right-hand people, and in charge of, he's the team leader for the Western Catchments Group. So Rusty's presenting this. The report writer, I believe, Anna's in the back of the room, so if there's any details, we can always call on her as well.
Welcome along, Rusty.
Mr. Chair, thanks for the opportunity to briefly update the committee on one of Council's more successful community programs. In a nutshell,
you've got a presentation there.
Yeah, just briefly, hopefully trying to advance it. Sort of the right hand side. Right, here we go. In a nutshell, Council's Care Group program seeks to support the aspirations of an army of environmental volunteer workers to deliver environmental works and restorations of importance to them and in their local communities. In doing so, the program aligns pretty closely with Council's identified 4 community outcomes and generates significant positive media to this effect for the groups themselves and for Council. Our support takes the form of funding, administrative support, pest management tools, plans for restorations and technical advice. A couple of highlights for the year. Despite COVID, our groups have remained active and have still achieved excellent results supported ably by our land management officers across the region. We've developed, mostly in-house, a mobile GIS mapping app for use by groups to plot their trap lines, report their pest catches and to visually see the outcomes of their mahi. The app, to be formally released early in the new year, is already in beta test and used by 17 groups. And those 17 groups have already reported substantial both catches and hours recorded doing the mahi. LMO Land Management Officer Anna Dawson led that project, and I want to commend her for the work that she did in both doing that at a under the radar kind of level and achieving something that's actually pretty useful to us, both in terms of the groups themselves, but also in terms of our own reporting to committees such as this. Though not strictly regarded as care groups, I did want to just also raise that the care groups are a bit of a nursery for some of our catchment-wide groups. And we're seeing an increase of engagement from our catchment groups or from our landowners within some of our focus catchments in particular. And that's leading them to generate funding request not only to us and to regionally, but also to central government, and that has a substantial impact on our ability to deliver more works in our focus catchments as they're leveraging our funding up and using a multiplier effect on that. So just in summary, it's a great program. It engages with our community, it supports council objectives, and we're pretty excited to be involved in it.
You've got the video too, apparently?
Yes, we have a video just to play.
And I'm a member of the Welcome Bay Estuary Care Group. I've been a member for, I don't know, 7 or 8 years. And why do I enjoy it? What better thing could you do on a morning like this, in a harbour like this? It's just beautiful. And we want to keep it beautiful.
Down here at the Waitaha Salt Marsh, we've been very busy in planting this area, particularly to encourage bird life and to look after the bird life. So all this will be full of ribbon woods, and this is an ideal place for them, and birds love them. So we're very proud of what's happened here.
Hi, I'm Alison Blaine and I live in Welcome Bay, and this is my neighbour Karen Moses. We both moved into Welcome Bay about the same time, around 3 years ago, give or take, and became interested in caring for the environment that was our new neighbourhood.
What you're seeing here today is part of a very active planting program that we've been undertaking for about 4 years now. And so all the bush that you can see around here, we planted.
Apologies for that, the video didn't actually show.
Thank you. Yeah, there was a series of people speaking there, but you got the gist of what they were saying. Questions, Councillor Clark?
With a view to growing the care group culture, which I think is very important in our region, and scoping out the wider bay, do we as a council identify potential projects that we'd actually like to match up with potential care groups?
I might defer to Anna on this, but I think what we would generally do is care groups would form, they would identify the areas that they're most interested in, and we'd align that with what we do and then fund them if that was appropriate.
Anna, are you available to come on up? Welcome along.
I'd probably support exactly what Rusty said in the way that it's normally the groups that come to us and approach us with an area they care about or of importance to them. So I strongly believe if they don't have the motivation within their own communities, then the project probably wouldn't be successful. So normally as
She's not.
Just need to be very closer. Be very closer. So in order for communities to deliver successful projects, most of them have come from them approaching us rather than us approaching them.
Okay, any further questions? There's a resolution on page 79, just received the report. Councillor Brunning.
Could we add to that a line to the resolution of appreciation to the care groups and the work that they do?
Certainly. Just noted in the minutes, Councillor Brunning, that we acknowledge the work they do, the valuable work they do, and boy, we've got a deal for them coming once the long-term plan's adopted in terms of more money for volunteer care groups and for do weeds and pests. You know, I'm looking around the room hoping we can support that.
We will.
We will. There you go. Thank you, Rusty. So there's a resolution on page 79. Move it, please. Councillor Nee, second by Councillor Love. Any further discussion? I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Thank you, Rusty. Thank you, Anna. Right, moving on to the regulatory compliance activity report on page 88. This is Alex and Stephen.
Good morning, good afternoon, councillors. So
So through the chair, I'd like to suggest that we take this report as read, but I've just got a couple of slides to talk a little bit about what compliance ratings actually mean and show you the difference between what we call a low risk non-compliance and things at the more serious end. So I've just plopped this table up here as a primer. Many of you would have seen it before in our previous annual compliance reports. The yellow low risk non-compliance is generally reserved for issues that we identify that are of a technical nature, things like late compliance monitoring returns or things that may have a risk in the future of causing an impact but aren't there yet. Once we get into the moderate and significant non-compliance, that's looking at things which have a really real risk or really continued patterns of non-compliance with those technical requirements. I have hit the button. I understand this is working a bit slow today. All right, so these are three really basic examples of what we would consider to be low risk non-compliance. I appreciate that they are not entirely clear, so I'll walk you through them quickly. The first one is just an example of the graphs we might look at to determine whether or not something's in compliance. That's the pH limits for a wastewater treatment plant discharge with your lower limit and your upper limit. And as you can see in the last result there, it's just dipped a little bit below that lower limit, but by and large it's been compliant the whole way through. The bottom left picture is some effluent ponding contained to land at a dairy farm inspection. And the far right is a decanting earth fund, earth sediment control on an earthwork site. The big issue you've got there is the snorkel for taking in the water is actually above the discharge point. So there we've got something that if the rain comes in, that's going to cause probably a reasonably significant issue because it's not going to treat any of the sediment coming off of it. So at the moment there's not an impact, but there's a chance it is, so that would be low to moderate. So just to develop on these is where it starts to get a little bit interesting. So does this point? Very slowly. Okay, so top left, that is actually the sampling results from the exact same discharge. And as you can see, it starts to tend upwards as a trend and have some quite significant exceedances of the suspended solid limits. So that's where that moved into, even though it is a technical non-compliance with a limit, because it was repeated and because it was starting to show an impact or a risk of an impact, we started to grade that up to significant and took enforcement action in regards to it. Bottom left is a stream or a discharge into a stream running green that's in the Rere Whakaitu catchment and has resulted in prosecution. And similarly on the right, you've got three examples of significant sediment discharge. The top two are two separate prosecutions, one of which is in play at the moment, so I won't talk further on that. The left-hand side one is the more recent Bay Gold and Verco prosecution, which we've got a result on. And the bottom left is just, it's actually taken from a video. I was going to put a video in there, but I'm glad I didn't in hindsight. But that's showing the dust just ripping off a site down in Papamoa. So again, that was regarded as significant and resulted in an abatement notice. So that's just to try and demonstrate a little bit of our thinking that goes into the grading. I don't have anything more to present, but if there's any questions, more than happy to ask them.
Thank you. Any questions on the report? Councillor Needs and then Von Delson.
Thank you very much. I just want to talk about a meeting I went to this week or last week in the evening where, and you probably know the site I'm talking about in Te Puna, the concrete crushing site, where the landowner has been directed to apply for consent. It was previously thought it was permitted activity. He's been directed to apply for consent. I understand he's disputing that. But the members of the public have been told that we have asked for mitigation measures to be put in place, sprinkling, etc. Now they are quite unhappy because they were told to ring in every day to report on, if they had any complaints. And the question is, why do I have to ring in every day when we know that it's an issue? And just to give you some examples of what they told me was one particular landowner adjacent has got a swimming pool, and he has got grit all in his swimming pool, which is actually quite hard to get out. Vegetable gardens are covered in, the vegetables are covered in the silica dust. So even with the sprinkling, it's not mitigating, and it very much depends on which direction the wind's coming from as to which landowners are getting impacted. But they were pretty hot under the collar and saying that we are really concerned about our health. Silica dust is not healthy for us. We can see it, we can feel it when we breathe it, and I'm getting frustrated with the regional council having to ring in every day to say we've got a problem when there's been this long dialogue and we've now got to wait until March before a consent is lodged. So I just am asking what we can do about it in that situation, because it's not, the mitigations aren't apparently working.
Through the chair, that would be my issue. Yesterday I met with both Western Bay senior management and the complainants. I'm happy to report the complainants left the building a lot happier out having met Sam and I. Where we're going with this is that we're going to put kind of a large document together where they can see all the issues and who's managing them, whether it's Western Bay or whether it's BOPRC. Again, they were very happy with that. They just want to see where the issues are, where they lie, and where a solution is going to come from. Reporting the complaints is really important. By just looking at a few of those pictures, if we can build a picture in front of court of the issue, and we can show all those complaints coming from the community, it's very valuable when we do go to escalated enforcement action. So unfortunately, I know it has taken a few minutes to do, but it is very important, and that's why we needed to do it.
Just Councillor Thompson suggested that we have an antenna app or something like that, so that it's quick and easy for people to just get in and provide the information without hanging on the phone and waiting till they get to the right person. So sooner we can do that, the happier they'll be. Thank you.
Councillor Von Dadelson.
Yeah, thank you. This is an area where, as councillors, we do get a lot of attention from the public, and where they're concerned. And I've noted in most areas that this compliance section of our work has really stepped up well. And I know, looking at the executive summary, the amount of site inspections and problem areas that you actually are dealing with are horrendous. So that's noted, but I still urge you to be even more customer centric when dealing with complaints. I've had been for the last, 18 months on air quality issues with a pet food factory in Judea that our community is not at all happy with the progress, and that's an action with staff, so I'm not going to detail that at all. And thank you for taking this last action, but please, I know your workload's high, but this is a really critical area to get really good customer-centric outcomes. And at the end of the day, I think compliance must be about how can we help, rather than, this is what you need to do to go through the hoops. So it's attitude really is all I'm just seeking. I've noted, as I said, it's a hell of a lot better in the last couple of years than it has been in the past, in my view. So you are making great progress, but I still think there's even more to do. So thank you.
Councillor Clark.
Yeah, what interests me in this regulatory space is how close are we towards developing a culture of complaint? I mean, actually, when I see this bit of dust, I spent 3 seasons in North Canterbury this time of year. It looked like that for 3 months of the year, and everybody ran your Corbin and all those towns there just put up with the dust blowing through. Whereas if you get a day out in town, it will go crook. It's an interesting thing, though. But I mean, in general terms, with you guys would arguably have to be an arbiter of what's actually a realistic complaint or not, and are we actually trending towards a culture of complaint through convenience? Or is that a bit too philosophical for you?
Through the chair, there's natural dust and there's man-made dust, and that's definitely a man-made dust that you're seeing over there. That's an earthwork site, but I don't see a trend towards that kind of lean towards making complaints for complaints sort of reasons. I believe that we're going through a lot of development, a lot of expansion, and a lot of people are moving into the bay, and they are real problems, and they want us to solve them, and we'll be there to help.
Chairman Leader.
Thank you, Chairman. Similar question to Councillor Clark. So when you look at the data, you'll see that this regional council, in terms of the CME national benchmarking, is at the top of the class in terms of response and all that sort of stuff. When you look at the pollution hotline response, and I suppose this gets down to, you need to give us a high degree of comfort that the allocation and the workload on people in your team is appropriate relative to the investigative and monitoring requirements that they need to do. So when you look at the data, you receive something just short of 4,000 calls a year through the pollution hotline. Of those calls, only 62 calls were classified as urgent, and 95% of those calls were reported action within 3 days. Probably more concern is the fact that, as Councillor Clark said, are we encouraging a culture of complaints? Because you substantiated 720 breaches of consent conditions regional plans, which are valid in terms of complaints. That only makes up for 20% of all the calls, 4,000 calls that you receive. So what we need to know is, have you got in place an appropriate triage system that picks for touch the ones that are superfluous or unsubstantiated? Because that's a lot of complaints, and I wonder why the Bay of Plenty here, and most of those complaints in terms of complaints were related to equality, which I take is probably directly out of Tauranga here in the main, because that's where most of them came from. But have we got a good triage system in place so we're not running around like headless chooks trying to cover everybody's complaints? And I think I heard Councillor Thompson, Councillor Need saying, can you develop an app? My concern is, be careful what you ask for, that may well compound the issues that you're trying to deal with currently.
Through the chair, we have one person who's a sole triage for all the complaints in the team. So there you get your consistency of that person aware of all the issues throughout the whole bay. That's a recent sort of development within the team. We pulled that position forward, so we're able to have that kind of filter that before we get to the actual complaints that we could get called out to. And it's been a great addition, and it's working really well. So I'd like to sort of reassure council that that triage is working really well, and that's the way that we're heading. With the number of substantiated complaints, a lot are air quality. So you're going to get, by the time you get there, perhaps the odour has dissipated a little bit, and that's kind of showing up in the numbers. So we are doing our best to be there as quick as we can, and we've got a large team of responders just here in the building alone, so we can kind of improve those response times the best we can.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson then needs. Councillor Thompson.
Who monitors the quality of stormwater ponds throughout the region?
Through the chair, technically Tauranga City Council or the relevant district council will monitor what's coming into and out of their own network and report that through to us. So we will pick up the monitoring for compliance with their consented limits. That's certainly the case where there is a comprehensive consent in place. work sites and individual developments, they'll have specific limits which some are required to meter, some are required to sample occasionally, and they'll put through to us to ensure they're compliant.
Supplementary, if I may, how do we ensure that the TLAs are appropriately monitoring stormwater ponds? And it's no surprise to you, probably, that a good example would be the Carmichael Reserve.
That's a very good question. I suppose our lever is to monitor the fact that they're actually complying with their consent. So in the case of Tauranga City Council and their comprehensive, they're required to do reasonably comprehensive and significant reporting through to us, and we can audit that to ensure that it's meeting the required limits and obligations within their consent. We have a dedicated Three Waters senior person who coordinates the whole Three Waters portfolio, and her role is actually expanding, her capacity is expanding with the addition of another person to support her. So we've got some real intense focus on there. We work with them for industrial site audits to ensure that there aren't too many unknown contaminants coming in from industrial sites. And we obviously, with Tauranga City Council, also have an MOU to allow them to, we warrant their officers to take enforcement in relation to discharges into their network. So we've kind of got a range of tools and levers in place to try and assist them to comply or ensure that they're compliant. And we do our best to monitor those and ensure they're effective.
Councillor Nees.
Sorry, I omitted to raise again the municipal wastewater significant and moderate non-compliances. There were 24 in total, which was roughly 20%, not quite. I just wonder if you could tell us who and what we've done about it.
So
this is on page 91, Jane, the chart on page 91.
Yeah. I can talk about some of them in a bit more detail than others. So the most significant one at the moment is happening in Kawerau. We have undertaken enforcement by issuing abatements and infringements to them on a number of occasions. We have also since advised them that we are undertaking a more detailed investigation in relation to some ongoing breaches in that district. Throughout the last year, there were also some challenges out of Western Bay. The main one was actually in regards to a bit of a difficult situation where they're required to do a very particular type of monitoring on the integrity of the pipeline coming from the Katikati treatment plant, and there is some tension about that methodology, but it's enshrined in the consent, so they're not able to undertake that monitoring, but they are working with iwi and community groups to try and reach a compromise that's going to work for everyone. Let me just double check if there are other significant ones. There was significant non-compliance out of BOPRC as well. That was in relation to a number of challenges with their site. They've since brought consultants on board and taken really great strides towards resolving those issues, so we were comfortable there. And similarly, there was an incident in Rotorua in the Whakarewarewa forest with a particular sprinkler that blew out. We conducted a detailed investigation into that and ultimately found that there was no significant liability at RLC's end on that, and it was simply a poor piece of plastic that failed.
Final question, Councillor Clark.
Yeah, the Kawerau one really fascinates me. How could you build a dairy factory that had all the potential to discharge into a site that obviously wasn't capable of handling it? So there was obviously a huge failure in the regulatory process in there. Where does the buck lie on that?
Through the chair, I think the most diplomatic response would be to say I can't really comment on that in the public forum.
We are working on it, Councillor Clark. Very closely, we are working on it. Any further questions? Okay, there's a resolution on page 88. Just received the report. Can I have a mover, please? Councillor Nees, Councillor Crosby, second. Any further discussion? I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, motion is carried. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Alex. Keep up the work. Harbourmaster Hills Upgrade Project. This is on page 97. Who's leading that? I think it's.
I'll go with this one, Mr. Chair.
This is yours, Christine Courtney. Welcome along. So this is on page 97. We've got a few resolutions to make, especially number 4 in terms of councillors on the design team, but we'll come back to that. Chris, Courtney, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We don't have a PowerPoint presentation and certainly no video, but by now you've probably guessed Pim DeMonchi is away on holiday at the moment, so I thought I'd ask Courtney if I could join her at the front and celebrate this piece of work that I think is amazing, which is the new design for a new look regional park at Papamoa. So we've really come to council to the committee to seek your approval of the design, answer any of your questions, and as you mentioned before, select a small group of councillors to take this project forward.
So have we got dollars in the budget for it, Chris?
Yes, we do. We're hoping it's the right amount of money. It may not be, but that'll be a problem we'll face when it comes along.
Okay. Any questions? Councillor Crosby, then Brunning.
If I can make a comment first, and I'm happy to be on the working party. Had a little bit to do with this project a long time ago and use it semi-regularly. I should use it a lot more, but I tend to over the summer. And congratulations, first of all, on the work done to date. The design's amazing. And I have to say, since I've been going there, the existing car park is getting more than often, up to the 80-90% usage. So clearly there is a need for this additional one. The other point I want to make is, in my observation, is that Papamoa Hills, the 2 observations. First of all, is connected to another farm called Summer Hills, which I happen to be a trustee of, which is also used for walking and mountain biking. So what you see at Papamoa Hills, you can also add to Summer Hills too from a public perspective. The second observation I make is Papamoa Hills project or park is becoming a really viable alternative to Maua. Maua itself is becoming highly used. Some might say overused at times. There are difficulty with parking, etc. So a number of the people I talk to at Papamoa Hills Park are using that as a substitute. So it's only going to grow above the 106,000, I think it was, last count. So I totally support the project and congratulations for the work done. The only additional part I would make is, I'm sure you're going to do it, is make sure that I think it's about 5 or 6 neighbours there, that they're also engaged and involved in the design, so they also take some ownership of it as well. But other than that, well done.
Thank you. Councillor Brunning.
Mine was in a similar vein, so I just want assurance that the neighbours have been involved and are in agreement with what's happening.
Through you, Chair. Yes, we have engaged with the neighbours. With the site that we're looking at for the development, it's bound on 2 sides by the rest of the regional park, and one of the neighbours has been made aware of the project. Naturally, as you would expect, that there is some sort of uneasy feeling there with some sort of development like this taking place beside their property, but we are working with them to reassure them that the design is pretty low key and there could be worse things built here as well. So we'll continue to work through that with that property owner. Could I add one more thing there?
Yes,
is that we're not looking at Fulton Hogan as an affected party as significantly as we were in the first place. We have slightly changed the car park location, as you'll see from the new design. But in saying that, Fulton Hogan or Stevenson's Aggregates with the Poplar Lane Quarry are the main user of Poplar Lane, and they are very, very supportive of this project. One of the main drivers for this project was actually around health and safety at the entrance to the existing car park, which is a real pinch point with truck and trailers laden from the quarry versus our park visitors in their smaller cars. So this was addressing this, and it's still on.
Thank you, Courtney. I've got Councillor White and then Easy.
Sure, thanks for the report, and I agree with you, Chris. Congratulations to you for this report. And I say that from, it's got an interesting boundary crossover between Taua and Matatua. So from the Waitaha side, and we'll say that even though it's in Mawao, Waitaha side, I know that they're pretty happy with it. And I think congratulations, because, you know, these things work on trust. And I think Pim and the team have put up a good trust with them. So congratulations. And I think Matimoana might want to say something later on about that.
Councillor Easy.
Kia ora, Mr. Chair. Looks great. The concept designs look fantastic. I'm just going to tell a cautionary tale, a situation that we're going through at the Ohiwa Harbour Heritage Trail. We went through a process, so this is just about the signage. We went through a process recently where we have established the Ohiwa Harbour Heritage Trail. We got signs designed, and I think the day I got elected as chair, we had all of the signs up around the room, an extensive consultation process. You all might know Tim Senior. He's very dedicated, been in that area, has great networks and connections, went through the whole process. The signs got installed about a week and a half ago, went through the blessing, and then Upu Orehe, who was one of the hapu around the Ohiwa Harbour, have come back and have taken complete offence to the copy and the photos that are there. So we're going through a process of how to remedy that situation. We don't want to take down the signs necessarily, but go through a covering and then a redesigning. I've suggested as a way forward to Tim that in terms of when you're dealing with tangata whenua, with some of this historical information and so forth, that I prefer to see signatures as copy is signed off through the design process, so that members of tangata whenua can take responsibility rather than it all getting pushed back upon us. So as the copy is written up and it's that signatures we get sign off from particular parties as we go through that process, so that we have a paper trail to then go back and go, well, we did go through the process, because at the moment it's just all conversation. Everyone gives the nod.
Yeah, it's a verbal.
It's a verbal. Yeah. So that's the story.
Point taken, Councillor Easy. Councillor Nees and then McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it'd be quite a good idea to have a Western Bay councillor on your small group of councillors.
I'm coming to that.
I'm happy to put my hand up unless Councillor Browning would prefer to be the rep. So that's just one thing. The other thing is my earlier question around Billion Trees Fund